don't take care of ourselves, we will not be able to be fully present for this movement. Is that right? Yes, it is. So I know folks are still streaming in over there. Would y'all mind if I take you for a moment and ask you to stand up? Yeah, stand up. And we've been talking a little bit about, yesterday, if you weren't here, I was talking a little bit about lineage and the fact that love is all of our lineage. And I know that's true even if I don't know you, because you're here. So if you're here, that means that you are rooted in a lineage of love. And sometimes we forget that because we forget it in the details. We forget it in showing up to marches and doing the paperwork and being behind the computer and all of those kinds of things. So I want us to just take a moment and root ourselves in that sense of lineage and our own connection to our lineage. And as I said yesterday, some of us have ancestors that we think about and we're like, well, you know, maybe not. So a woman I know that teaches a lot about lineage and ancestors, she says that what you can do is you can put those folks for now on the altar on the side, and then you can heal backwards, right? That you can do the work today that heals those ancestors that you're not quite sure about yet and heal them backwards. So I'm going to ask you to feel your feet and extend your roots down into the earth. And take a breath in, and on an out breath, extend your crown to the sky so that you can be tall and stand in the dignity of your lineage of love, no matter where you came from. Take a breath in. Just roll your shoulders up and out, because we're all carrying these burdens on our shoulders. And feel the openness of the heart space and how it feels to open that sense of vulnerability in your heart and in your belly as you breathe into that. And come around. This is really important because we always look towards the future, but we want to come around to our backs and feel our ancestors at our backs. And if you have ancestors that you're not quite sure of, you can put the ancestors that you want, the ones that have had your back, the ones that have done the work, that has brought you here today, that has allowed you to be here. Sometimes not always in the best way. Sometimes very, very imperfect. And yet they were there and they were showing up. And then you have the mentors that showed up for you. And that's who we want to connect to, and that's who we want to know for the duration of our time, that those folks are at our back as we look forward to the progressive vision for 2020 that all of our speakers are going to speak into today. And know as they speak, and you find those little moments of like, oh, I'm not sure if I agree with that, or I'm not sure, that you can come back right here and you can feel your feet again. And you can feel that lineage of love that is at your back. And know that you can connect into it and tap into it at any time. As we bring forward the vision of people, the indigenous peoples, of Black peoples, and know that when we hold that vision for the people that have been most marginalized, most pushed out, that what we do is we make space for everyone. So make space for everyone, including yourself. Thank you so much and enjoy the program.
Please welcome the co-founder of Aspiration.com and founder of Working Action Hero, Joe Sandberg.
How are you? It's so great to be here with people whose politics we all share and feel like we can all let our hair down being here together. I have an announcement that I'd like to make. I am not running for President of the United States. You never thought that saying those words would make you unique, but here we are in 2019. Now, I actually thought seriously about running for president because someone ought to run for president around the agenda of ending poverty. So over the course of the spring with Working Hero Action, we held 31 different forums in Iowa and South Carolina with leading presidential candidates to talk about the question of poverty. Somewhere along the lines over the last couple of decades, have you noticed we've abandoned the definition of poverty to the statisticians? That poverty has become what the numbers say instead of how people are living. One of my favorite Dr. King quotes is about segregation, but it applies also to poverty, which is, segregation relegates people to the status of things. Similarly, when we define whether someone is poor by the mathematical amount of money they make instead of the emotional and lived experience of their daily life, we relegate them to the status of a thing. You can't tell me that someone who earns $10,000 above the poverty line but has no health care and wakes up in a cold sweat in the middle of the night wondering how she's going to take her kids to the doctor is middle class. Yet, over the past couple of decades, have you also noticed that all Democratic politicians talk about is the middle class? In fact, there are people who even told me, you can't use the word poverty. That's a bad word. And in that, people have gone around the country telling everyone they're middle class. You're only supposed to describe poverty of people who are really, really in the deepest state of despair. But is it dignifying to tell someone who has no health care, who's earning $47,000 a year with 2 kids, that she's middle class? I think that's insulting. I think that doesn't see the life that that person is living. Describing that person as part of America's poverty crisis isn't demeaning, it's honoring of the truth that she is living. When almost 8 out of 10 Americans live paycheck to paycheck, there is no middle class. We have a poverty crisis in this country. You probably noticed that some members of the corporate establishment say that progressives don't have a coherent vision. And that's such bullshit. This is our vision. Our nation ought to be governed to end poverty. Our nation ought to be governed to end poverty. And here's what that means. First of all, it means we recognize that poverty is the lived experience of real people, that poverty is the nearly 8 out of 10 Americans who are living paycheck to paycheck. Second of all, it understands that end poverty requires 2 really simple objectives. You have to make work pay a lot better by creating a minimum wage that's a living wage. Once we achieve 15, we need to go to 20 and 25. We have to massively expand the earned income tax credit. And then we have to make the things people have to buy every single day more affordable. And there's no bigger life's basic need that has to become more affordable than healthcare. And so part of ending poverty is we have to have Medicare for all. The third pillar of our governing agenda to end poverty is we have to get at the root causes of a system that treats some people differently than others. We have a poverty crisis because our system is infected with structural racism and structural misogyny. And until we change the rules and punish people who perpetrate prejudice with proportionate consequence, we won't end poverty and we won't end racism and misogyny. The next pillar of our agenda to end poverty has to be investing in jobs. Not random little initiatives here and there, but the kind of big investments in an industrial policy that we've done when America's produced the best paying jobs. And the obvious industrial investment we have to make is fixing our carbon economy and turning it into one that's carbon neutral. And that's why a Green New Deal is so important in our agenda to end poverty. And the last pillar is not a policy one, it's a culture change. The reason that all of us are going to be the ones who lead the charge to end poverty is because the charge is going to be led not by people in elected office, but by change makers in our community. You know, I think we rely on politicians too much. Politics is what flows from our culture. And if we're going to create a politics to end poverty, we have to create a culture that recognizes, speaks, writes, and shouts every single day, end poverty. To those who think it's crazy, we need to remind them of what Dr. King said in his Unfulfilled Dreams speech of March of '68. He said, "One of the great agonies of life is we are constantly trying to finish that which is unfinishable. We are commanded to do that. We are commanded as progressives to lead this nation to a governing agenda that ends poverty. You know, I first became interested in change making when I had my bar mitzvah. I'm a liberal Jew. I love being a liberal Jew. And when I was 13 years old, I read from the Torah for the first time. And I read this Torah portion called Shoftim. And it goes this way. It says, justice, justice shall you pursue. It doesn't say justice, justice shall you achieve. It says, justice, justice shall you pursue. Like Dr. King says, we are commanded to try and finish that which seems unfinishable. But we've stopped trying to end poverty. We've stopped saying we're going to end poverty. We've stopped writing that we're going to end poverty. Which is why right now, I want everyone to take out their phones. I want everyone to open Twitter. And as a community, as a movement, I want us to make the hashtag end poverty trend on Twitter. You know, I'm so passionate about this issue that sometimes I'll be looking on Twitter to see who's tweeting the hashtag end poverty. And you'd think that that hashtag would be as prominent as the hashtag #MeToo. Those are two of the most important hashtags in our moment. Yet, for some reason, people rarely tweet hashtag end poverty. That's going to change right now. Out of a middle class that's been turned into ashes from a monopoly economy must rise a spirit that leads a movement to end poverty. And so my question is, will you rise right now? I want everyone to stand up. If we're going to end poverty, if we're going to do what seems unfinishable, it's going to be because the change makers in this room rise. And so I want to hear us together say, in a chant, end poverty, end poverty, end poverty, end poverty, end poverty. Louder. Say it for the people who are living paycheck to paycheck. Think about the people who don't have health care who are counting on you. End poverty. Thank you, Netroots. I'm counting on you to end poverty. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Please welcome Dr. Lena Wen, the president of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund.
Good afternoon, everyone. Where is my Planned Parenthood family? So I want you all to imagine this. You are in need of urgent medical care. The closest health center, though, is 200 miles away. When you arrive, your doctor tells you that because of state law, she cannot provide your treatment today. You have to come back in 72 hours. So you go home, you arrange childcare and time off from work, and you do this 400-mile round trip again 3 days later. This is the reality of abortion care today in the United States. Today, 6 states have only one provider of abortion left. Last month, Missouri came within hours of losing abortion access entirely. And as we speak right now, there are 15 cases that are one step away from the Supreme Court. If Roe is overturned, then 1 in 3 women of reproductive age, which is 25 million women, could be living in states where abortion is outlawed, banned, and criminalized. Now, you all know that earlier this year, Alabama signed into law the most extreme abortion ban since Roe versus Wade, with no exceptions for rape or incest, that could put doctors in jail for up to 99 years, longer than the rapist could receive. By the way, laws that criminalize doctors have another effect, because to be enforceable, they allow the state to investigate women for having miscarriages. So last week, I decided to write about my own experience with a recent miscarriage. My husband and I desperately wanted to grow our family and to have a sibling for our son, who's almost 2. It was devastating to go through. And I just cannot imagine how cruel it would be to compound the trauma of my pregnancy loss with the indignity of government investigation into my personal medical records. I once treated a woman who waited days before she came to the ER for a miscarriage complication. By the time that I saw her, she was in septic shock, and she almost died. She didn't have health insurance, which is something that no one should face, just as no one should be afraid of being criminalized for seeking medical care. Let's be clear that we are in a state of emergency for reproductive health care in America. And a state of emergency requires an all-hands-on-deck approach. So fellow advocates and activists, we need to act today. We need to be clear that keeping people unhealthy is a tool of oppression. And that stigmatizing sexual and reproductive health care is a tool of misogyny. So as we organize, as we mobilize, as we fight in the courts and in the legislatures, I need your help to do 3 things. First, I need your help to spread the word and speak about abortion care as the health care that it is. One in 4 women in America will have an abortion in our lifetimes. Abortion is part of the full spectrum of reproductive health care, which is health care. And politicians, people don't turn to politicians for advice about cancer treatment. So politicians have no place in someone's personal medical decisions about their pregnancy either. And now second, I need your help to talk about the essential care that Planned Parenthood health centers provide every day. Did you know that other than for the VA, Planned Parenthood is the only national healthcare organization with a presence in all 50 states? Planned Parenthood's over 600 health centers provide primary and preventive health care like cancer screenings, birth control, and yes, safe, legal abortion care, which is health care. And we are proud as Planned Parenthood to serve not only women, but men, LGBTQ people, youth, families, and all people. And did you know, too, that Planned Parenthood is expanding services such as trans care, maternal health, mental health services, which is also healthcare, too. And our doctors, nurses, and clinicians connect patients to health insurance and assist with food and housing needs, because that's good healthcare, and that's what Planned Parenthood does. So I need your help to affirm what Planned Parenthood does every day, that sexual and reproductive health care is health care, and that health care must be a human right guaranteed to all, not just a privilege available only to some. So third, I need your help to be bold and to take back the language. We need to call it as it is, that these extreme abortion bans have nothing to do with medicine and science. They have everything to do with power and control over people's bodies. And we need to speak out that choice alone is not enough when that choice is predicated on privilege. And these policies that restrict care, they will hurt those who already face the greatest barriers. It's families with low income, it's people of color, it's immigrants, it's LGBTQ people. So we need to lift up the work of our partners who have led the movement not only for reproductive freedom, but for reproductive justice. Because a right is a right in name only if there is no access, and because nobody is free unless everybody is free. And one more thing too. These same states that have some of the most extreme abortion bans also have some of the worst health outcomes. Alabama leads the US in cervical cancer deaths. A pregnant person in Georgia is 10 times more likely to die in childbirth than a pregnant person in California. 5 counties in Missouri are facing an 1,000% increase in syphilis. So we need to reclaim the narrative and take back our language. They don't get to call themselves pro-life when they push policies that are taking healthcare away from people every day. They don't get to call themselves pro-life when we are the ones who are providing life-saving, life-transforming care. And we need to say loud and clear that being pro-choice, being pro-reproductive health care means that we are pro-women, pro-child, and pro-family. And we need to be loud and proud that our values are the ones that define America: health, dignity, justice, freedom. So I'm going to end today with a quote from Congressman John Lewis, who said that there is good trouble and bad trouble, and good trouble is when we stand up to injustice. And so friends, colleagues, fellow advocates, now is the time to create good trouble together. We must speak up and fight for sexual and reproductive health care as a right for all. We must be brave, and we must take back the language and the values that belong to us. We must act now. We must stand up to injustice, knowing that we can do better, and we must do better because people's lives and our children's futures depend on each and every one of us. Thank you.
Please welcome Manira Edens, North Philly Community Organizer at 1PA.
Hello. Thank you for this privilege to stand before you guys today. Again, my name is Manira Edens. And a little bit about me. I'm a young mother, a proud young mother of 2 teenage boys. Right, we're from the Philadelphia area, mainly North Philadelphia. Right, we have North Philly in the building today. But we went to public schools. I actually graduated Temple University in 2007. Thank you. And I achieved my GED at that time. I had to drop out of school to try to provide for my family, to show my boys that it's okay. It's okay to struggle because it's a bigger outcome. So in 2007, when I graduated with my GED, I also achieved my Certified Nursing Assistant certification. Right. I worked in plenty of nursing homes, but in 2012, I found myself having to work at McDonald's. For $7.25 an hour, I worked hard to prove myself, to sustain a minimum wage job where my title was a cashier, but the duties that I performed there, I should have been the boss. You know, I was able to run a store. I had to filter oil. I had to buff, strip, and wax floors. Jobs that you don't even think that are at McDonald's. But that's what I had to go through. Wiping toilets, to have a job that is not even giving me 40 hours a week. So throughout my years of living, and actually at that time, the bigger issue was me being homeless. With my 2 boys, I was homeless, actually living in a park. Love Park. Anybody know Love Park? I actually slept there before they renovated it. I actually still will walk out this door and see people that I slept with. I was in a session not too long ago, and somebody was telling a story about knowing somebody else that slept in the car. How about being a person that actually slept in the car? How many people can say they've experienced that? Not many. Not many. So when I tell my story, it's from my heart. It's real. I actually still worry, and I think about these things on a daily basis. These two teenage boys that I'm scared to live in this city because they're black men, because it's so easy for them to be statistics. It hurts. So when people come and they share stories about what they've heard, that hurts as well, because I live it. I live it every day, all day. I may not make $7.25 anymore, thank God. That's a blessing, right? The worry doesn't stop there. I've been in my new residence a couple months. In the last 5 years, I've had to move at least 5 times, though. What kind of life is that? I may have a roof over my head now, but what about activities for my children? What about calming the worry in me for them to be successful? For them not to be frowned upon because of where they're from? So now today, I'm proud to say I'm the North Philly community organizer at 1PA. But it doesn't get easier. It actually gets harder. Because now I have standards that I have to uphold. I hold meetings and I talk to my neighbors, and when they come and they share their stories, it hurts that they think they're alone. It hurts that they think nobody else is going through those things. But when they share these stories, I feel the pain. I talked to one resident who is hurt because her rent has doubled from the previous owner. You know what she asked? Why? Why? She's now paying a water bill that she never ever had to pay before. And the only thing she wants to know is why. So we try to develop relationships with developers, people who know nothing about our city, people who come in and own handfuls of properties or maybe hundreds of properties. When I'm looking at my neighbors and my friends and my family, and we're praying to one day be homeowners. In a session I was in earlier, they asked about poverty. What does poverty look like? You want to know what poverty looks like? Poverty looks like achieving things and still worrying. Poverty looks like you feel like you're climbing the ladder and now you feel stuck again. Because you never know when you'll be pushed down that ladder, when you'll have to start all over again. That's what poverty looks like. Poverty is the fear that we have when we walk these streets, because we know people are willing to do anything to provide for their family. I talked to another resident who had, her house was caught on fire in a house that she previously lived in. Now she moves into this new lovely home because it has fresh paint on the wall. But then she has it's like an extension cord where she plugs it in the wall, and it's telling her that there's faulty wiring behind these walls. But her landlord put some new appliances in and now was able to charge her double the rent. Where is that right? Where is that humane? So when I have these encounters with our community members, it hurts. It hurts bad. We try to build relationships with people so that we can see change. I build relationships with people because I know we can make change. I've seen it done. I'm here and I'm standing here because I'm going to hold our elected leaders accountable. I'm here at 1PA because we pushed for legislation to be passed, because that's how you make a change. Is it or is it not? Is that how we're going to make a change? How about when are we going to make a change? We need to make a change now. We need to not wait. We're fighting to keep the land that we need to live on. This land was given to us, but we have to pay to lay our heads at night. Some people say, oh, well, okay, right? But what about these property taxes? It's okay, I don't mind. But when people can't afford their property taxes and now their homes go up on sheriff's sale, now they're losing their homes. Now the people that they care for and they take care of, now they're losing their homes. This is why we need to take down a system that was designed for us to fail. I'm honored to support the communities that I was raised in. But we have to hold our elected leaders accountable. We have to make a change. We have to stand together. And we have to do that now. So that's what we do. Let me tell you what I need you to do. I need everybody to support organizations like us, not just us. I need y'all to support these organizations just as much as you support the election. We support these elections, and then our elected leaders get in place, and they forget about who? The people who deal with these issues on an everyday basis. We are fighting to end displacement. You know why? It's mostly affecting our Black and brown communities. And these Black and brown communities, who are most of these people in these Black and brown communities that are affected? Single mothers like myself. Single mothers like myself. We need to not only hear from people who want to make a change, we need to hear from people who experience these life-changing events every day. We need to hear from the constituents of our communities. And that's me. That's my neighbors. These are the people we need to hear from. So while I thank you guys for coming, I do want to challenge you guys to something. I know a lot of people are not from here. I know a lot of people that come here stay in this vicinity. So you wouldn't know what I'm talking about, do you? So I challenge everybody in here, if you have not left this inner city, take a trip tonight. Go 5 miles. Matter of fact, make it 8. Go 8 miles away, whether it's north, whether it's south, and see what I'm talking about. It's in our streets. It's in these parks that they try to cover up. It's right in front of our faces. So thank y'all. I do want to say 1PA, we are having a fundraiser tonight from 5:30 at 1501 Cherry Street. We have some lovely 1PA members here. If you want to stand up. So support the fight. Don't just support it with your money. Support it by doing the challenge I gave you. See for yourselves. Because if I go to Kensington, if you're from Philly, you know what I mean. There's tents up. It's not just adults living in those tents. Children are out there. And that hurts. So thank you. Show your support. We have tickets available. And also show your support by letting the constituents speak. Hear our experiences. Know how we feel. And because we know what we need. We know what we need. Enjoy your day.
Let's welcome Saru Jayaraman, President of the Restaurant Opportunity Center United and Director of the Food Labor Research Center at UC Berkeley.
Hi. How is everybody this afternoon? Doing good? My name is Saru. I lead a national organization of 130,000 restaurant workers, employers, and consumers working together for better wages and working conditions in the restaurant industry. And we have grown a lot over the last several years because our industry is exploding. A couple of years we passed the 13 million worker mark, and now we're about to hit the 14 million worker mark. 1 in 11 American workers currently works in restaurants. 1 in 2 Americans has worked in this industry at some point in their lifetime. How many people here ever worked in a restaurant? Look around the room. So we are the nation's largest and fastest growing industry, but we are also the absolute lowest paying. And before I say anything else, I think it's important to think about what it means for the future of our country when the largest and fastest growing industry in America is the bottom of the barrel, absolute lowest paying employer in the United States. It means that right now we're at 1 in 3 working Americans working full time and living in poverty. And in just under 5 years, we're going to get to 1 in 2 working Americans working full time and living in poverty. What does that mean for the future of our country, our economy, our democracy? When half of the country cannot afford to eat out in the restaurants that they work in, let alone afford to eat. That fact that we've got the largest and fastest growing industry in America with the absolute lowest paying jobs is due entirely to the money, power, and influence of a trade lobby called the National Restaurant Association. We call it the other NRA. It represents the chains, the IHOPs, the Applebee's, the Olive Gardens. And in doing research, we uncovered that they haven't been around 50 or 60 years. Oh no, they've been around 150 years since emancipation of slavery. Because it turns out that tipping as a practice originated in feudal Europe. It was something that aristocrats gave to serfs and vassals, always on top of a wage. But when it came to the States, right around the time of emancipation, the restaurant lobby demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves, not pay them anything at all, and have them live entirely on tips, a mutation of the concept of tipping. And that idea of tips as wage replacement for a black population with no wage became law in 1938 as part of the New Deal, when everybody got the right to the minimum wage except for the workers of color, farm workers, domestic workers, and guess who? Tipped restaurant workers who were given a $0 wage as long as tips brought them to the full minimum wage. And we went from 0 in 1938 to a whopping $2.13 an hour, the federal minimum wage in the United States in 2019. I hope you are as ashamed of that fact as I am. There are 43 states in the United States, including Pennsylvania, with these absurdly low wages of $2, $3, $4 an hour, perpetuating this legacy of slavery. Not for a tiny workforce, but for the nation's largest and fastest growing industry. And 70% of these workers are, guess who? They are women. They are women working in IHOP and Denny's and Applebee's, struggling with the highest rates of economic instability and poverty and the absolute highest rates of sexual harassment of any industry in the United States. Because when you work at IHOP and Denny's and your wage is $2 an hour or $2.83 here in Pennsylvania, your wage is so low it goes entirely to taxes. You're living completely off your tips, and you must put up with whatever the customer does to you, however they touch you or treat you or talk to you, because the customer pays your bills, not your employer. And when this is your first job, for so many of you who raised your hands, half of American women, this is their first job. This is how they're introduced to the world of work. This is how they learn what's acceptable, normal, legal, ethical. So we've been interviewing older women who tell us, I have been sexually harassed in my current profession, but I didn't do anything about it because it was never as bad as it was when I was a young woman working in restaurants, which means our industry doesn't just have the highest rates of harassment. We set the standard for what is acceptable and normal and legal in the workplace across the economy, and that's not okay. Fortunately, I'm talking fast. Fortunately, there are 7 states that got rid of this system many decades ago. California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Minnesota, Montana, and Alaska all require the industry to pay the full minimum wage with tips on top. And if you listen to the other NRA, you would think we don't have restaurants in California. Let me invite you to visit me. We have restaurants. And in fact, our 7 states have higher restaurant industry job growth, higher rates of tipping, and 1/2 the rate of sexual harassment, because it turns out when you pay a woman a full wage, she doesn't have to put up with anything and everything from the customer, because she can count on a wage from her boss like every other worker in every other industry. So in 2013, we said if California and 7 states can do it, why can't every state and Congress require all employers to pay the full minimum wage and get rid of this legacy of slavery? And we started to win. We won this on the ballot in Maine. We won this on the ballot in D.C. We won it in the legislature in Michigan. And every time, the National Restaurant Association lobbied legislators to overturn our wins, and most of the time it was Democrats who rolled over and listened. And even worse, every time the wage has gone up to 15, as great as that is, outside of the 7 states, these women have been left behind. In some cases, like in New York, the tipped workers' wages went down when everybody else went up to 15. We are the negotiating bloc. We are always thrown under the bus when everybody goes up. And that's got to stop. We got to stand up for each other. Women and women, men and men, men and women, people of color, we have to stand up and end this legacy of slavery. Because what happens when you leave 6 million tipped workers and 13 million restaurant workers out of the minimum wage over and over and over again, and you see Democrats doing it to you, and of course Republicans don't care? I'll tell you what happens: you don't vote. In fact, you don't give an F about voting. In fact, you don't care at all, because you see politicians leaving you out and rolling over to the likes of the NRA over and over and over again. We proved it in Michigan. Michigan, we lost to Trump by 11,000 votes. There were 400,000 restaurant workers who mostly didn't vote. Their wage is $3.52 in Michigan. We collected 400,000 signatures, put it on the ballot, and the Republicans knew something Democrats didn't. They took it off the ballot out of fear this would drive working people to the polls, and they made it law. They tripled the wages of waitresses in Michigan, Tea Party Republicans. And when they did it, they said, don't worry, NRA, we are going to gut it after the election. We're doing this to keep people from voting. We're going to gut it after the election. What did we do? We mobilized 100,000 working people to vote, saying we just want to raise, but if we want to keep it, we all got to tell each other to go vote. And we won. We saw a 300% turnout increase in 2018. 300%. So we know it works. We know it works. We won the governor, the secretary, AG, and they're going to help us actually achieve one fair wage in Michigan next month, ahead of all the blue states. But this year, thanks to Me Too and Time's Up, 16 states introduced one fair wage bills, including Pennsylvania. And next Thursday, the House of Representatives is about to pass the Raise the Wage Act that will raise the wage to 15 and fully eliminate the sub-minimum wage. The Senate's not going to pass it. Trump's not going to sign it. But it will be the first time since emancipation that either House of Congress moves to eliminate this legacy of slavery. It's a big frickin' deal. And so we are celebrating this and commemorating it and honoring the legislators who are moving this We have 8 or 9 Pennsylvania legislators who are here with us today. And right after this, at 4:15, we're meeting at 12th and Arch. We're going to walk over to a neighboring restaurant, and these electeds are going to serve any of you who join us. They're going to be a server for an hour. They're going to learn what it's like to be a tipped worker. They're going to hear from tipped workers. We're going to honor the fact that there's a historic legacy about to be created, and we're going to honor the legislators here in Pennsylvania who are fighting a good fight for one fair wage. I hope you will join us at 4:15 at 12th and Arch. There are blue-shirted folks, Calvin, Sam, and Sig, who are handing out flyers. I hope you will join us. If you can't join us, I hope you will support us and stand with us and get all of us to fight together so nobody gets left behind, because let me tell you, you do that at your peril. If you don't care about restaurant workers or minimum wage, but you do care about reproductive justice, or you do care about climate change or anything else, let me tell you something. There will never be the political will to win everything that we want if you continue to exclude, disregard 13 million workers who do not have a wage, who work 2 and 3 jobs, who neither have the time to vote, nor the wherewithal, nor the desire, because they see people leaving them behind over and over and over again. 150 years ago, we made a decision. We said to 2 industries, tobacco and cotton, we don't care if you say you need free labor to survive. That's not a sustainable business model. Why are we allowing an industry today to say we will not survive unless you allow us to have free labor? Enough is enough. Thank you.
Please welcome the mayor of Stockton, California, Michael Tubbs.
Wow. I'm ready to carry something in Stockton for Saru. And thank you, Saru, Manira, and you all. I think it's an honor to be here because I understand that oftentimes the people on the microphone, that's where people think power resides. But we all know here at Netroots that power resides in the clipboards, and the tennis shoes, and the bullhorns, and the work you all do. So I want to start by thanking you all for your tireless efforts, and know that your labor is not in vain. And please, like my grandmother always says, don't get weary in well-doing, for in due season we'll reap a harvest if we faint not. I'm happy to be here today. My name is Michael Tubbs, and I'm the mayor, not the intern, I'm the mayor of the great city of Stockton, California. And I'm here. Okay, Stockton. And I'm here today because the issues we fight for, the things we talk about, aren't just theoretical. They're personal for us. It's personal for the young person in Flint, Michigan, whose brain development might be impaired because of the water he or she has to drink. It's personal for the mother who just addressed our Congress, whose baby died in our immigration custody. It's personal for the young people right now as we speak, held in detention centers and camps, who are going through unspoken trauma and horror on our shores. It's personal for the young person growing up in poverty, as Manira said, in West Philly. It's personal for the workers we talked about, who are working for 0 wages and living off tips. The work we do is so important because it's personal for us, and it's also personal for me. Before I was mayor, I was a young, poor black kid in the south side of Stockton, California. My mother, she was a teenager when I was born. She was a senior in high school. And my father has been incarcerated the last 28 years, so my entire life. Growing up in Stockton, in neighborhoods with high poverty and low opportunity, neighborhoods that were high in everything bad and low in everything good, I believed in this myth of exceptionalism. I thought if I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, if I worked hard, if I studied, I would be okay. I was lucky enough to get a full scholarship to Stanford. I was lucky enough to intern, but then when I was an intern in the White House, the other White House, I received a call from my mother that changed the trajectory of my path. My mother called me in November 2010, and she told me that my first cousin had been the victim of a homicide. He had been murdered in Stockton, California. And in that moment, I was faced with a choice. And the choice was one of whether apathy or action, whether to stay angry, stay upset, be nihilistic, or to do something about it. So it's the midst of that pain of thinking of, well, maybe it's not enough for me to be successful. Maybe there are structural issues that lead to different outcomes. Maybe people can't pull themselves up by their bootstraps if they don't have boots or shoelaces or a floor. That caused me to run for city council in Stockton in 2012 as a 21-year-old college senior. And I was lucky enough to win. And then I won again in 2016 to run for mayor. And now we're really in Stockton figuring out what does a progressive vision for 2020 look like. And I think that conversation, particularly for us here at Netroots, is so important because if you see what I see, I think we have to first start by understanding that what we're seeing is nothing new. 2020 vision, a progressive vision for 2020 has to start with the fact that this is not the first time a white supremacist or a misogynist has been in the White House. A progressive vision for 2020 has to literally see and name that this is not the first time we have had racist immigration policies. A progressive vision for 2020 has to name and understand this is not the first time we've had massive wealth inequality. A progressive vision for 2020 has to name and understand what we're experiencing is not about a person in the White House. It's about an ideology of white supremacy in the system. And it's going to take real policy work and a policy agenda and understand it's bigger than a person to get us to where we need to be. And forgive me, I'm 29 years old, and I really struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still having conversations like sexual harassment is bad. I struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still having discussions about whether climate change is happening. I struggle with the fact that in 2019, we're still fighting and answering the same questions that we had from the foundation of this union. But I'm excited to be here with you all because I also understand that this may be not the first time we're facing these issues, but I think together, united with clarity, this will be the last. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 about a living wage for all people. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 about the need to address the existential threat to our species of climate change. I don't want to have a conversation in 2024 or 2028 that all people, men, women, trans folks are truly created equal. And our policies should reflect that. So in Stockton, what we're doing things like making sure that every single student who graduates from our largest school district is guaranteed access to higher education through a place-based scholarship for a 2-year school or trade school or a 4-year college. We're saying in Stockton that even the folks who are perpetrators of violent crime deserve the same attention from resources and opportunities and cognitive behavioral therapy as they get from cops. We're saying in Stockton that our 2020 vision is one that understands that folks need an economic floor, and that's why we're piloting a basic income. And the conversation has been one of dignity, and not dignity attached to what I can produce, but dignity attached to my humanity. As people, we're inherently dignified. Now, as we heard from Saru, folks are working. The issues aren't that folks don't have jobs. The issues that folks aren't making wages to keep up with rent. I have conversations every single day with folks who are working 2 or 3 jobs, driving your Ubers, delivering your food through Uber Eats, who still can't pay bills. And I think a progressive vision for 2020 has to say enough is enough. I think Fannie Lou Hamer said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And we're not talking about anything radical. We're not talking about anything crazy. We're talking about what we all deserve as human beings. And I think Netroots Nation, we have to literally put our stake in the ground and say we're happy to have this fight in 2020, but we're not fighting for dignity for all people afterward. That's a given. We're happy to have this fight in this election, but after this election, white supremacy in this country is done. We're happy to have this fight in 2020, but thereafter, we have to hold these truths to really be self-evident, and as Dr. King said, have America be true to what it said on paper. So as I close, there was an activist I had the pleasure of meeting 10 years ago. His name was Bob Singleton. He was a freedom writer, and we were reenacting the freedom rights. And he looked at me when we were in Anniston, Alabama, and he said, "Michael, I was arrested on August 4th, 1961. Why is that day important?" And I said, "Well, sir, you were arrested. If you weren't arrested, I wouldn't be on this bus. I wouldn't have the privileges I had." And he said, on that day, Barack Hussein Obama was born. And then he said he had no idea, as an activist, as an organizer, that the choice he made on that day would pave the way so a child born 50 years later will have the chance to be president. And then he looked at me and he said, "What are you prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child is born with more opportunity?" And Netroots Nation, that is the question before us today, tomorrow, and in 2020. It's easy to be angry. It's easy to be upset. It's easy to blame everything on a person or a figure. But I think the question before us today is, what are we prepared to do with our works, with our policies, with our votes, so that a child born today, 50 years later, aren't fighting the same fights we're fighting? What are we prepared to do today so a child born today can look back at us with pride and honor and say they stood for something and they fought? What are we prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child is born in a country that's not still arguing about whether we should have affordable housing? So a child is born in a country that's not still arguing about whether everybody, meaning people who look like me, people who don't, have inherent dignity and equality. What are we prepared to do today so that 50 years later, a child born today in poverty in West Philly or in poverty in Stockton or drinking the water in Flint has a chance to be president? If we answer that question the way I know we will, with works and not words, then the conversation we have, not in 2020, but in 2024 and 2028, will be radically different. So as I prepare to close, I say this. I say thank you for not what you've done, but what we will do. And I'll also say that again, in 2020, it's our chance to put a stake in the ground. It's our chance to say, you know what, we're happy to fight these fights because they're worthy fights. But it's our chance to say it's not the first time this has happened in our country, but it will be the last. It's our chance to say that we're happy to organize and mobilize and fight, but we understand the meaning of neighbors transcends economic anxiety and xenophobia, and that we don't want to be facing the same fights in 2024 and 2028. Thank you.
Please welcome the Huffington Post's Amanda Turkle.
Hi, thank you. So we just heard from some movement leaders about some of the biggest problems affecting this country. And now I want to talk a little bit about how we get big progressive ideas through Congress, if we can get them through Congress. And we're having a little change in schedule. So I am joined right now by Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. He is the author of the Equality Act, which recently passed the House. And he's been leading the effort to bring attention to the cruel treatment of migrant children being held in detention at the border. So we are also going to be joined later, I believe, by Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is rushing here from Washington because votes were delayed. And so she took a later train. She is on her way here. So when she comes, she'll be joining us on stage. So I wanted to start a little bit on something that recently happened in Congress where I think progressives should have had more power than they did. And it showed sort of, I think, some of the struggles in getting progressive priorities passed. And this is the aid for the migrant crisis at the border. And I'm going to summarize it really briefly for those of you who weren't following the ins and outs of what Congress is doing. Basically, the House passed a more liberal version of legislation giving aid, and it had some restrictions on how Trump could spend it on his enforcement agenda, and it provided protections for migrants. The Senate then passed a version, you know, it's obviously controlled by Republicans. It was less liberal, but the idea was that it would then go back to the House, there would go to conference, and some of those more liberal provisions would get added. Instead, the House simply passed the more conservative Senate version. And the rub is that most Democrats in the Senate voted for the more conservative version. Senator Jeff Merkley was not one of those who voted for it. He voted against it. So I wanted to talk to you, Senator, a little bit about why you voted against it, why so many of your colleagues voted for it, and just what happened.
I want to say a word first about the underlying issue, which was a year ago, June, that I went down to find out what was going on with this, quote, zero tolerance policy that sounded like the administration was going to rip children out of their parents' arms. And I went to that processing center in McAllen, and nobody had been in there yet. I went in and I saw those chain link cages with boys separated here and girls and fathers and mothers. And my God, this is not America that we treat refugees in this fashion as criminals. We need to stand up for the fundamental value of treating people with respect and decency in our country. I mean, we're talking about children blockaded at the border, left stranded in Mexico. We're talking about children put in ice-cold holding cells. We're talking about children ripped out of their parents' arms. We're talking about children without hygiene, without 3 meals a day, without the basics of having darkness at night so they can sleep. We're talking about a child prison industry in which a for-profit is being paid $750 a day to lock up children in Homestead, Florida. All of this is wrong and against the fundamental values of America, and we have to come together and put an end to it. That's the underlying position. So in the Senate, we tried to get some protections in, and Pat Leahy, the head of the Spending Committee, Appropriations Committee, did the best he could with the Republicans in control. But the whole conversation all along was the House will do far better and we'll go to conference and we will win a number of those features. And a whole series of things that, by the way, 40 senators yesterday endorsed and introduced my bill, which is End the Cruelty to Migrant Children Act. We want that act passed, and it's not going to pass first in the Senate, it's got to pass first in the House. So here's the situation that was so frustrating, is the House on this spending bill, they didn't go to conference. So we lost all the leverage that the progressives, like Congresswoman Jayapal, had worked so hard to get. It just went down the tube. And so that's, we cannot let that happen. The House has to carry its weight to restore the values of America. It failed on this occasion. That's very frustrating, but let's take it a lesson and not let it happen again.
So whose fault was it that it didn't go to conference? Is it Speaker Pelosi? Is it the moderates in the House? What happened there?
So I'm observing from a distance, not being a member of the House, but the complete assumption on the Senate side was that Speaker Pelosi would take it to conference, and she didn't. And she is the leadership, so that's where the responsibility rests.
Do you think that her hand would have been strengthened against the moderates in her caucus if so many Democratic senators hadn't voted for it?
So I think it's a fair point. Perhaps, but the product of the Senate is a Republican-led product, not a Democratic-led product. So I wouldn't put too much emphasis on that side of the coin.
And tell me a little bit about why you voted against it, specifically. You know, you mentioned that Pat Leahy fought for protections, but why, why did you still vote against it?
So as I just shared with you, there's these multiple ways that refugees are being mistreated, that children are being mistreated. And so I wanted to say funding that goes to this administration, we cannot trust they will spend it in the right ways. We need, in the law, deliberate protections to stop the for-profit prison system. We need to be able to shut down the tornillos and homesteads. We need to be able to stop child separation by law. We need to stop the blockade at the border by law. Those are the things that need to be in the bill as well.
So I will, I'll ask Congresswoman Jayapal more about this when she arrives, but I wanted to turn now to the Senate. What power can Democrats wield in the Senate, even though you're in the minority? Do you think Democrats are doing it effectively, or are there big structural barriers that simply you have no power?
So I have a kind of a mission statement for the next 16 months, and it does involve the Senate, but it goes like this. Dump Trump, ditch Mitch, save America. That's our mission. What Mitch McConnell has done as majority leader is take all the power onto himself, putting his amendment in front of all others, which has been a tradition in the Senate, but a tradition that then is taken down so others people can amend. He has not done that. He has blockaded all the amendments, controlled all the bills coming to the floor. So essentially, the Senate is deeply frozen. What it has become is simply a court-packing session in which Mitch is putting up one right-wing crazy judge after another, packing the district courts, packing the circuit courts with people who do not believe in the we the people vision of our Constitution. And this is horrendous. So can we stop that right now? We can't stop it right now under the rules of the Senate, which is why we have to take control of the Senate and the presidency in the November election next year.
So say that Democrats take control of the Senate. Are there rule changes that you would like to see done?
All right, let's talk about the dysfunction of the Senate. In the Continental Congress, they had a supermajority requirement, and it paralyzed the Continental Congress. So they didn't put a supermajority into the Constitution for legislative bodies. Quite the opposite. Hamilton and the Federalist Papers raged against the problem of a minority being able to exercise a veto over legislative activity. And what do we have now in the Senate? We have a veto by the minority over bills coming out of the Senate. And the result is that let me back up a little bit and say what the Republicans did, their agenda was to do tax reductions for the rich and powerful of the country. So in 2001, they brought in a new parliamentarian, and they proceeded to take a measure called reconciliation. It's a budget process that allowed you to use a simple majority to decrease the deficit. And they stood it on its head and said, now we can use that. So they changed the rules to expand the deficit, which meant giving tax breaks to the wealthiest Americans. Republicans established a simple majority pathway for their agenda for the powerful. We need a simple majority pathway for the we people agenda of healthcare, housing, education, living wage, jobs, carbon pollution, and equality.
So I think there's been some frustration amongst activists that Democrats could be doing more, say, to stop Trump's judges. I mean, obviously you don't have a majority, but it seems that Democrats at times have agreed, we'll pass this number of judges and then we can all go home for recess. So, do you think that again, I know that there's not a lot you can do in the minority, but is there more that you feel like Democrats could be doing?
So there's something called the nuclear option, which is you change a rule by interpretation of the parliamentarian, or you overturn the ruling of the chair in interpretation by simple majority. What Mitch McConnell did a few months ago is he overturned the time period required to debate judges and reduced it to 2 hours. And the result is he can do a judge every 2 hours basically for a day. Why did he do this? Because we were slowing him way down. We were using the rules of the Senate to slow it way down. So he retaliated with the nuclear option. The nuclear option Many people have been nervous about using it. The fact is, it wasn't even front page news. If Mitch McConnell is going to use a nuclear option for the powerful and to pack the courts, let's use the nuclear option for the people of the United States of America and be able to pass legislation by simple majority. In fact, I would put it this way. When the presidential candidates come before you in the coming year, they're going to talk about all kinds of things they want to do on health care, on housing, on education, on living wage jobs, on equality, on carbon. So important. And the question is, well, the Republicans changed the rules to pass their agenda in the Senate by simple majority. Are you going champion passing your agenda by simple majority? Will the Democrats be as gutsy and determined as the Republicans were to get their agenda passed? And the answer better be yes, or they shouldn't be on the presidential stage.
So you'd like a Democratic Senate leader who, do you want to see Democrats essentially act more like Mitch McConnell?
When you put it that way. In terms of using power for the people, it's the exact opposite of Mitch McConnell. He's using power for the powerful, accelerating income inequality and wealth inequality, making it that much more difficult for people to get ahead. We heard that next Thursday there's going to be a vote in the House of Representatives to end the sub-minimum wage, right? Saru just talked about it. How is that going to get through the Senate? Right now, it'd be impossible to do that because the powerful control the Senate. That has to end. We have to fight to restore America and put it back on track with the vision it was intended with.
So we now have Congresswoman Jayapal here, so I'd like to welcome her out.
Great.
Hi. We're so glad you could make it. Thank you for rushing. We're sorry the House votes delayed you, but we're glad you're here. Congresswoman Jayapal is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and she is the lead sponsor of Medicare for All in the House. So I wanted to bring you into a discussion that we were having about the border supplemental and the funding for the migrant crisis, and we were talking a little bit about what happened, the breakdown. So I'd like to talk to you and get your perspective on this. What happened? Why did the House simply pass the Senate version and not go to conference?
Well, first of all, hello, Netroots Nation. I'm so excited to be here and with this champion as well. And I'm sorry I'm late, but we had to vote. So here I am. In terms of what happened, let me just take you chronologically quickly through a very short timeline, which was a week ago Thursday, we got the emergency supplemental bill. And because an emergency supplemental doesn't have to go through any committee process, it is just drafted primarily by leadership of the appropriations committees. Nobody had seen it. So literally the first time I saw the text was a week ago Thursday. I guess it would be 2 weeks ago yesterday now. And when I looked at it, it became very clear that it did not have accountability built into it. And I have been a skeptic of continuing to give more money to an agency that does not meet the conditions that we require them to meet. And an agency that, frankly, no matter how much money we give, this administration is trading in cruelty, number one, and number two, getting money to for-profit contractors that benefit off of caging children. And so when we looked at this, we realized that it had none of that accountability. We called an emergency progressive caucus call on Sunday that had over 4 dozen of our members on the phone. The CHC the night before called an emergency call of their members, and working together, the CHC and the CPC put together a list of 6 things that we thought, if we were able to get into the border supplemental bill, would at least allow us to have that accountability, and not just for this bill, but actually for the 2020 approps bill as well, which is very, very important. We need to start building in accountability. And so I will tell you the first answer was no, second answer was no, the third answer was no. By the time we got to the 7th or 8th answer, we were actually able to withhold enough votes, and we are training our Progressive Caucus members to not say no or yes to a bill until we get what we want, or at least some of what we want, into that bill. And so we were able to do that, which meant that the bill wouldn't have enough votes to pass. We knew we weren't going to get Republican votes for our bill. And so doing that, we were then able to finally, it went until the very last minute on Tuesday, somewhere around 4 o'clock, came to an agreement around two very important provisions. Number one, that there is no waiving of conditions for these children. There are basic standards that have to be met: food and water, medical care. Who would have thought we need to write this stuff down? But we had to write it down because in the Senate bill it said that you could waive those conditions for up to 12 months. Totally unacceptable. And so we said, number one, these are the conditions you cannot waive. And number two, this is something I have been, as an immigrant rights activist, trying to get for over 20 years now, using money as a lever, as a hammer, that if you do not meet the conditions that are laid out, and we said within 6 months, that you get your money blocked. You do not have a contract anymore. You cannot bid on a contract anymore. You should not have that. Okay? Which is super important. Now, I have a whole nother bill that deals with getting rid of these for-profit facilities, period. So that's a different thing. So we were able to get those in. We were able to get not holding kids for more than 90 days, I think. That felt to me too long. But anyway, we were able to get some things in. We brought it to the floor for a vote. It passed overwhelmingly. It went to the Senate. The Senate voted it down. The Senate then voted their bill, sent it back to us on Tuesday night. The Senate bill passed. Senator Merkley was a champion, and one of, was it 4 people who didn't vote, or 8 people handful of people who didn't vote for the Senate bill. But unfortunately, it passed with overwhelmingly bipartisan support, 84 bipartisan votes in the Senate. And so when that happened, a bunch of our conservative Democrats and moderate Democrats said, hey, the Senate just passed a really bipartisan bill. Why are we screwing around with these changes? Why don't we just pass the Senate bill? We were on the House floor for the vote for the rule for our amended Senate bill. We took the Senate bill, we added our provisions into the Senate bill, not all of them, but enough to still make it worthwhile. We were about to bring that bill to the floor for a vote. We were voting on the rule, and we were told that there were enough Democrats who were not going to vote for that bill and wanted to just vote on the Senate bill. And theoretically, it was because the Senate was not going to budge and the White House was not going to budge on any of these conditions. But my belief is we got to fight. We got to fight hard. And we cannot accept no when we have divided chambers. And we also can't have the Senate passing these big bipartisan votes because it affects what happens in the House. And so you saw that I said some things about some of my Senate Democratic colleagues, and I've had some good conversations since then. But listen, we have to make sure that we have a spine and that we keep a spine and that we push for the things that we really believe in. And if at the end we lose, then at least we lose fighting. But we should not allow this to go down. And so that is the story. In the end, there weren't the votes even for our amendment to the Senate bill, and they put up the Senate bill as it was. There were over 100. We whipped a no. The Progressive Caucus whipped a no on that bill, and there were over 100 votes against that Senate bill, but it passed because most of the Republicans voted for it.
Can I throw in a question here? Because perhaps I misled people, because I tell you a little bit of this perspective from the Senate side was the viewpoint that the chair, the ranking member of the Senator Probst, got what he could out of a Republican-led Senate, but that planning was underway to fight with you all in conference. And so I was personally extraordinarily disappointed that the House didn't say, fine, you passed your bill, we passed ours, let's go to conference. Because I think there's where we might have had leverage to get what you're talking about.
That's what we were told as well, that the idea was, well, the first idea, which I knew was a pipe dream, but I like pipe dreams sometimes, was that the Senate would take up our bill, which I didn't think was going to happen. I thought we were going to have a conference. But when we had, two things happened. When the Senate voted in a big bipartisan way to pass the Senate bill, it made it easy for those who didn't want some of the provisions we had put into our bill, including not funding of ICE and the $17 billion for HSI, that's Homeland Security Investigations, which is not being used for what it's supposed to be used for, it's being used for deportation, then that in particular, that provision, people did not want to exclude that money. And so it gave leeway, it allowed for some of our more conservative Democrats to say, why should we vote for this bill when our senators voted for that bill? And I have talked to some of my Senate colleagues and explained this dynamic, and I think hopefully we'll have a different way to approach this for the future, because I hope that my good Senate Democratic colleagues will understand that a big bipartisan vote in the Senate takes away our leverage in the House. We lose the ability for some of our members to be able to hold when their senators are voting for something.
Senator Merkley, do you think that senators were aware of this dynamic, and was, Senator Schumer telling members to not vote against it for this reason, or did he allow them to?
I don't know. I don't think it was a case of the minority leader, Schumer, instructing people how to vote. But there was extensive discussion among the leaders of the Appropriations Committee that they got the best deal that they could, but that they would be working with the House to improve it in conference. And so that promise of conference probably contributed to the dynamic. But it's good to have that sense of how the Senate and House Democrats have to work together, because what happened is the Republicans got a very bad bill with no accountability, and that's just a horrendous outcome.
Can I just add, too, that I have spoken to Senator Schumer since this all happened, and we had a great conversation. And one good thing I think that will come out of this, because, Senator Merkley doesn't have all of his progressive colleagues right there, because there's a presidential race going on. So there are a lot of people that aren't in the Senate who have traditionally been some of our champions there, so that there's more. And one really good thing that's come out of this is, I think the Progressive Caucus in the House and Senator Schumer and our progressives who are there will coordinate more closely going forward. And so I think that was something really good that came out of this. And Senator Schumer is coming to talk to the Progressive Caucus next week, I think. And so we are really trying to develop that relationship and make sure we're working together for the goals that all Democrats have.
So another thing that I took away from this was that it seems like conservatives in the House, conservative Democrats, have perhaps more power than people thought they may. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the dynamics between the conservatives, the speaker, and progressives. And I'm sure most people know, but Nancy Pelosi said of your colleagues, Tlaib, Omar, and Ocasio-Cortez, all these people have their public whatever in their Twitter world, but they don't have any following. So I wanted to get your thoughts on, what is the speaker doing? Why is she singling out these progressive women like this?
Let me go to the bigger question of progressive power, because honestly, I don't think you can just look at this, right? So we have been working very hard to leverage political power inside Congress. I'm an organizer and an activist. I believe that it all comes down to votes, whether you're on the outside or the inside. You've got to be able to leverage the votes. And there were lots of reasons infrastructurally why the Progressive Caucus in the House hasn't had the kind of power that it should have. And we should talk about what we're doing to fix that. But what that means is, there are choices that you make, whether it's as an activist on the outside or an activist on the inside. If you say you're going to vote no on something and you stick to voting no, you have less leverage to push some of the changes that you need through. But in the end, the power of how many votes you can garnish for whatever position you're pushing for is what is really important. So I think what Pelosi was talking about was that if you only have 4 votes in the House, that you can't get what you want done. Now, I have said publicly, I don't typically find Pelosi to be somebody who disrespects members. I've never felt disrespected as a woman of color by Nancy Pelosi. I don't think those comments were helpful to a broader picture of how we build progressive power in the House and what it looks like relative to overall Democratic power. All of that said, we have been remarkably successful in what we've been able to do with the Progressive Caucus in the House. We got, for the first time, we got equal representation on major committees, all of the A committees. That means financial services. When you see Katie Porter and Rashida Tlaib and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on that committee, we negotiated that. That has never happened before. We negotiated at the beginning of the session for 40% representation on those committees. That means Jimmy Gomez, who just introduced Bernie Sanders' estate tax repeal, is now on Ways and Means. That has never been introduced by a Ways and Means member. It meant that we were able to get Medicare for All hearings in the Budget Committee, in the Rules Committee, and in the Ways and Means Committee, and hopefully now in the Energy and Commerce Committee. So part of this is, how do you leverage a block of votes sufficient to get the power that you need? And then what's the other infrastructure you need? And I hope we get to talk about the Congressional Progressive Caucus Center and the Congressional Progressive Caucus Action Fund that Mark Pocan and I helped establish to really help coordinate research, organizing, communications, so that it helps move progressive priorities.
So I think there's been some frustration amongst activists that it seemed like at times Pelosi has been sidelining progressive priorities like the Green New Deal, impeachment, Medicare for All, and she's used terms, I think she described some of them as enthusiasms. At what do you feel like the speaker has sidelined progressive priorities? And at what point, if any, do you think that progressives should start acting like conservatives did toward John Boehner?
I don't want to act like conservatives did towards John Boehner. God, we have higher goals than that, don't we? But I know what you mean. Look, we brought down the budget caps deal because we did not want to vote for a huge defense spending number. Now, we still got rolled in the end because in the end, we're only 40% of the Democratic caucus. So people just have to understand that that's where it is. And you're in a majority, so it's very different than operating in a minority. Nancy Pelosi is going to respond to where her caucus is. And we do not have everybody in the caucus believing that our progressive priorities, my Medicare for All bill, Senator Sanders' Medicare for All bill, canceling debt, college debt, $1.6 trillion in college debt, Ilhan Omar's bill with Bernie, Elizabeth Warren's anti-corruption bill, we have not gotten to the place where we have 218 votes for that. And Nancy Pelosi is a vote counter, if nothing else. And she is a master strategist. And so she's not going to go there unless we are able to build the pressure for it. However, she is a negotiator. And to get Medicare for All hearings for the first time in the history of the country, of Congress, to be able to have 3 hearings in less than 3 months, is pretty phenomenal. That would not have happened had she not okayed it. Now, if I want to get a vote on Medicare for All, I need to show that I've got 218 votes, because it's not going to go to the floor if it doesn't have 218 votes. And so I think it is, nothing comes easy, no fight comes easy, and I don't think we should expect that that's the case. I think we are progressives because we are fighters, and we believe in a different vision than what is in front of us, and we believe we push to make that happen. Nobody brings us that on a silver platter and hands it to us. You got to fight, and you got to show that you have power, but the power can't just be on the outside. We have to get people on the inside to catch up to the people of the United States of America who know that these progressive priorities are the right priorities going forward.
And Senator Merkley, I know you're in another chamber, but I didn't know if you wanted to comment at all on what's going on in the House, the treatment of progressives, and I know you've had some thoughts about impeachment specifically.
Well, what can't happen in the House is for it to become routine to pass bills with a combination of Republicans and conservative Democrats. That will totally undercut everything that you're trying to do. And so that's a piece I'm concerned about. And on impeachment specifically, before when I was asked, I would say, well, let's see what the Mueller report is going to say, because that's going to tell us what the president really did. Well, 1,000, actually more than 1,000 former federal prosecutors have written to us and said anyone who did the things described in the Mueller report would be indicted. That's powerful, because above the doors of the Supreme Court is carved in equal justice under law. Now, I know we fall short of that all the time, but it's a core principle we strive towards. In fact, my first political act was when Spyro Agnew was convicted of bribery, taking $100,000 in bribes, and his penalty was $10,000. He got to keep 90% of the proceeds. So I'm a junior in high school. I'm a blue-collar kid. I come home and read the blue-collar newspaper, and I read this and go, are you kidding me? That's what justice is for the powerful? They get to keep 90% of the money they steal? And so I wrote to the newspaper, and they printed it. That was my first political act. And I look out of the Johnson room, and of course, President Johnson, when he was a majority leader, he had his office looking out at the Supreme Court at those four words, equal justice under law. And a lot of the work that was done for the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act was done in that room. And that is where we launched the Equality Act in 2015, which the House has passed, and now the Senate has to pass it. And by the way, the House has passed H.R. 1, which is to end gerrymandering, voter suppression, and dark money. In the Senate, that's the For the People Act that Tom Udall and I have been leading, and we have to get that done if we're going to restore we the people democracy. So when I think about this impeachment question, it's this. If we do not proceed after 1,000 prosecutors say the president violated in the law that anyone else would be indicted, if we don't proceed to act in the House and hold him accountable, then we are allowing a major institution to crumble, and that's why I'm saying the House has to act on impeachment.
Do you think that we're running out of time for impeachment? Do you think that we're running out of time for impeachment?
I am worried about it being a conversation that carries us on into the primaries of next year. So I think the time is now. The time is to now, and not try to say there's 1,000 charges and let's explore every nuance, but there are things that have already been clearly laid out in the Mueller report. And so I'd like to see the House take up a limited set of those and hold a vote and decide if they're going to hold the president accountable. Send it over to the Senate. Now, I understand that the Republican leadership of the Senate may not take it up. And if there is a trial in the Senate, which there absolutely should be, we may not win the trial. It takes a supermajority. But I just feel it's a moral obligation and such an important foundation for our nation. We cannot allow a president to romp all over the law and simply walk away. Unacceptable.
So I wanted to ask a little bit about Medicare for All, which I know you both support. So
can I just say a quick thing
please.
on impeachment, because I'm on judiciary. And so I was one of the first Democrats in the House to come out for impeachment inquiry. I was on the impeachment articles last session. And I really believe that it's easy to look at this fearing what might happen if we go forward with impeachment, but I think that is totally the wrong approach. I actually think we have to flip that. And we have to actually be looking at what happens if we do not move forward.
Amen. Amen.
I think that's really important, but because there's some perception out there that somehow it's safer for us not to move forward. And I have now read the Mueller report 3 times because I am on Judiciary Committee. Today in Judiciary, we had a set of legal scholars talking about remedies for high crimes and misdemeanors. It isn't just, there are lots of ways, by the way, to begin an impeachment inquiry or a set of proceedings around impeachment, including not necessarily just through a vote on the floor of the House. And we were able to talk through many of those. As many of you have heard, we are going to have Robert Mueller in to testify. And that has taken a long time to do that. We have now issued subpoenas for Don McGahn, for a whole host of people, as well as on issues like family separation. We just did subpoenas on family separation yesterday. And I just think we have to think very hard about how we wake up in the morning and how we go to bed at night and say that we uphold the oath that we were sworn to, which is the Constitution of the United States of America. And there is no question in my mind that this person in the White House has committed multiple offenses that are high crimes and misdemeanors that meet that test. And what we have to do is we have to start to bring that information out, because when Robert Mueller released his report, it was like he was throwing it down the football field, and it was intercepted by Bill Barr, who is not the Attorney General for the United States of America. He's the Attorney General, apparently personal attorney for President Trump. And he intercepted that report, and he lied and misled the American people about what was in it. And the majority of people are not like us, and they haven't read the report. So that is what we need to do now, is make sure we get that information out.
I know we're out of time, but I want to close with those 6 words that I mentioned earlier. Dump Trump, ditch Mitch, save America. And it will depend upon the energy that all of you have to go out this coming year. Obviously, you're not locking yourselves up in your living room with a pillow over your head. You're here. You're ready to fight. The only power that we have to restore America is outside pressure partnered with inside pressure. But we need a Senate in blue hands, as well as a presidency and a Senate that will act with a simple majority to save this country and put it back on track. God bless you all.
Thank you so much. I wish we had more time. I have pages of questions, but so thank you all. And I believe, I don't know where you're going next. But anyway, thank you so much to the members of Congress for coming.
We have a special announcement from informedimmigrant.com. Raids targeting the immigrant community may start as early as tomorrow or Sunday and are expected to continue through July 18th in 10 to 12 major cities across the U.S. We share this information not to feed into fear, but to help communities be as prepared as possible in the event of a raid or other immigration enforcement activity. The operations may target families and individuals with final orders of removal, often due to court notices being sent to inaccurate addresses. Many of these families were victims of family separation and are now slated to be retargeted and traumatized by these cruel raids. For more information, go to the latest Informed Immigrant Facebook post to find local organizations that are providing critical services in the event of a raid. Thank you.